In an old house on the outskirts of the city, lived a simple yet loving family. The family consisted of Mr. Andy, a father who worked as a carpenter, Mrs. Rena, who lovingly cared for the house and family, and their two children, Sarah, a 16-year-old teenage girl, and Artie, her 10-year-old younger brother. Although their life was not luxurious, the house was always filled with happiness, reflected in the laughter and little stories they shared every day. Every morning, Mr. Andy woke up early to prepare wood for his work that day, while Mrs. Rena was already busy in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Sarah and Artie, though still young, were used to helping their parents around the house. They knew how hard their parents worked to provide a better life for the family. One afternoon, heavy rain poured down. The strong winds made the leaves on the tree in front of the house tremble, while inside, the warmth from the kitchen provided comfort to everyone in the house. Mr. Andy had just returned home after a full day working in the woodworking shop, and Mrs. Rena was serving dinner. Sarah, who usually sat in her room studying, was sitting at the dining table this time, sketching in her sketchbook. "What are you drawing, Sarah?" Mrs. Rena asked as she scooped rice into a bowl. Sarah turned, smiling slightly. "Just a sketch of my dream house, Mom. I really want to have a big house, with lots of gardens and spaces for gathering together. I think we could live more comfortably." Mrs. Rena nodded, though her eyes seemed a bit misty. "A dream house, huh? We may not have much, Sarah. But the important thing is that we have each other. We never forget to always be grateful for what we have." Sarah paused, staring at her unfinished drawing. Sometimes, she felt confused. At school, many of her friends talked about luxurious vacations abroad or the latest gadgets they had. Meanwhile, she and her family only had a small, simple house and lived in a very different way. But after hearing her mother's words, she felt more at peace. Her mother always made her feel that what they had was enough. After dinner, Artie, who was usually cheerful and full of energy, suddenly seemed downcast. He sat in the corner of the living room, with his head down. Sarah, noticing this, became worried. "Artie, what's wrong? Are you feeling sick?" Sarah asked as she approached him. Artie shook his head slowly. "I just don't feel good, sis. My friends at school said our house is ugly. They said we're not rich, we don't have a car, and we're not like them." Sarah sat beside her younger brother and hugged him. "Artie, you don't need to worry about what others say. Our house might be small, but we have each other. We have a family that always supports and loves us. That's more important than all the fancy things they have." Mr. Andy, overhearing their conversation, walked over. He sat down on the wooden chair next to them and looked at his children. "Artie, Sarah, your father wants you to know something," he said with a wise voice. "A home is not just about how big or small the building is. A home is where our hearts are. It's where we support and love each other. Whenever you feel anxious or worried, remember that this house will always be a safe place for you." Mrs. Rena, who was washing the dishes in the kitchen, joined in gently. "And don't forget, even though we don't have much, we always have the happiness we create together. That's the most valuable thing." That night, after the rain subsided, the family sat together in the living room. They enjoyed a cup of warm tea prepared by Mrs. Rena, talking about various things, everything from funny stories at school to their simple vacation plan to a nearby village full of flower gardens. Sarah felt more at ease. Although the dream of having a large house with a vast garden was still in her mind, she now understood that happiness didn't always depend on what we have, but on who we have around us. The warmth in their house, not just from the fire in the hearth, but also from the love that was always present, was the most precious thing. The next day, Sarah and Artie decided to help their parents more. They began cleaning the yard, tidying up the house, and helping with the cooking. Though there wasn't much they could do, every small step they took together made the house feel more alive and full of love. As time passed, Sarah began to feel a change in herself. She no longer worried too much about comparing herself to others. She knew that happiness was simple, and their house, though small, was the warmest and most loving place. The friendship with her family was the most important thing, and it was priceless. On one weekend, the family went to the nearby village, as they had planned. Although there were no luxury cars or trips abroad, they enjoyed the togetherness in a simple way. They walked through the flower gardens, breathed in the fresh air, and talked about their future with hope. As the sun set, Mr. Andy held Mrs. Rena's hand, as well as Sarah and Artie's hands. They stood together, watching the sky gradually turn orange. "This is our real home," said Mr. Andy, looking at the family around him. "Here, we have everything. We have love, we have happiness, and most importantly, we have each other." Sarah smiled, holding Artie's small hand, and thought to herself, "This is our true home, where love and togetherness will always make us feel rich."